So, how do you make a huge decision today when you know it's going to affect everything for years to come, but you have no idea what the future actually holds? It's one of the toughest questions there is, really. And in economics, it's a massive challenge. We're going to see how it was finally cracked by looking at a surprisingly, well, down-to-earth problem.
Back in 1987, an economist named John Rust published this paper. I know, the title looks pretty dry, but don't let that fool you. What was inside was absolutely revolutionary. It was about cracking a problem that had stumped economists for decades. How do you essentially read someone's mind using nothing but data? And he did it by studying the very real day-to-day choices of one man and his fleet of buses.
And this was the question right at the heart of it all. When is the right time to replace a bus engine? Seems simple enough, right? But this is a deceptively tricky puzzle. It's not a one-and-done choice. It's a decision you have to make over and over. And every single time you make it, it completely changes the choices you're going to face tomorrow.
To really get this breakthrough, we first need to get inside the head of our protagonist, a maintenance supervisor named Harold Zurcher. Now, he wasn't thinking about economic theory or anything like that. He was just a guy trying to keep his buses on the road.
So every day, Zurcher was facing this trade-off. As an engine gets older, the mileage racks up and so do the maintenance costs. But replacing it, that's a huge one-time expense. He was in this constant balancing act between the slow burn of ongoing repairs and the big financial hit of a brand new engine.
And here's where it gets really interesting. When economists took a look at Zurcher's actual decisions, the data was, well, it was a mess. There was no simple pattern. Some engines got replaced super early, others were run for nearly 400,000 miles. It was obvious he wasn't just following some simple rule of thumb like replace at 100,000 miles. There was some kind of hidden logic to his choices, and that's the mystery we need to solve.
And that complexity, that messiness, is what created this massive headache for economists. You see, they could see what Zurcher did, but they had to figure out why. This is what they call the inverse problem.
Okay, so here's the key difference. A static decision is simple. It's a one-off choice. Think about buying an apple. You just weigh the cost and the benefit right now. But replacing an engine, that's a dynamic decision. You have to think about today's costs, sure, but also all the potential costs and benefits that stretch out into a future you can't even be sure about.
As John Rust himself put it, the whole goal was to work backwards. He had the evidence, the engine mileage and the replacement decisions, and from that evidence, he wanted to reverse engineer the hidden logic, what he calls the objective function, that Zurcher was using without even realizing it.
Now, this hidden logic, economists have a name for it, the value function. It's not just a simple pros and cons list. It's more like Zurcher's complex gut feeling, an internal calculation that's weighing every possible future scenario of keeping that engine versus replacing it. And for an outsider, for a researcher, that whole thought process is a complete black box. You just can't see it.
So how in the world do you solve for something you can't even observe? Well, Rust's genius was in developing this incredible computational method that could actually peek inside that black box. He called it the nested fixed-point algorithm. I know it sounds super technical, but this wasn't just some clever math trick. It was a fundamental breakthrough because it allowed economists to finally estimate these really complex dynamic models without having to oversimplify them into unrealistic toy versions.
The concept is basically a four-step loop. Think of it like a detective building a profile. Step 1. Guess the motives. The computer makes a guess about what Zurcher cares about, like how much he dislikes paying for repairs. Step 2. Solve. Based on that guess, it calculates the perfect, optimal strategy he should be following. Step 3. Check the evidence. It then compares that perfect strategy to what Zurcher actually did with his buses. And finally, Step 4. Update and repeat. If the two don't match, the algorithm adjusts its guess about his motives and runs the whole thing again. And again, and again, getting closer each time until its simulated strategy perfectly predicts Zurcher's real-world choices.
And this, right here, was the core innovation. It was the magic key. The statistical model wasn't just guessing at Zurcher's behavior. It literally contained a perfect simulation of his complex, forward-looking decision process. Before this paper, economists could only really guess at the why. Now, they had a machine that could actually find it.
So what did this powerful new tool actually uncover? Well, the results turned out to be about a lot more than just bus engines. The model did way more than just match the historical facts. It actually provided a clear, economically intuitive explanation for a really strange pattern in Zurcher's decisions.
Okay, so here was the puzzle. Zurcher was replacing the engines on his newer buses way earlier, even though they cost a lot more to replace. Why would he do that? The model's answer was just elegant. His behavior revealed that he expected the maintenance costs on those newer buses to skyrocket more than twice as fast as on the older ones. He was choosing to pay more upfront to avoid an even bigger, more painful stream of costs down the line.
And the model found something else really profound. It estimated Zurcher's discount factor, which is basically just a mathematical way to measure his patience. A low number would mean he only cares about today. A high number means he cares a lot about the future. Zurcher's was 0.9999, incredibly close to 1. This was proof. He wasn't just putting out fires day to day, he was playing the long game, making choices to minimize costs far into the future.
This method became a kind of master key. The same fundamental logic could be applied to unlock all sorts of other dynamic decisions. Things like why people search for jobs the way they do, when companies decide to enter or leave a market, or even your decision about when it's finally time to buy a new car. It just blew the doors open for a whole new field of research. And this power, the power to unlock so many different problems, it gets at a much broader, more philosophical point. The story of Harold Zurcher and his bus engines isn't just a clever case study, it's an argument for a fundamentally more powerful way of doing economics.
You see, simpler models can find correlations. They're good at telling you what happened. But structural models, the kind that Russ built, they're designed to understand the underlying decision process itself. They're built to answer that much deeper question. Why did it happen?
And once you understand the why, you unlock the real superpower of this whole approach, the ability to ask, what if? This is what economists call counterfactual analysis. Because the model truly understands Zurcher's underlying motives, it can predict how his behavior would likely change if the circumstances were different. You can ask really important, policy-relevant questions that a simple correlation model could never, ever answer.
And that right there is the ultimate takeaway. Modeling the full, forward-looking decision problem is what lets us move beyond just describing what people have done in the past and lets us start making credible predictions about what they're going to do next.
You know, it all started with a simple question about bus engines. But the tool that it created forces us to ask a much bigger one. What other complex, invisible decisions that shape our world are just waiting to be explained?